Good morning, everyone. I'm Jane Greenberg, and Rebecca introduced me. Yes, I'm from Drexel University. I'm a professor there in the College of Computing and Informatics in the Information Science side, and I direct a small center called the Metadata Research Center. So I focus a lot of my research in the area of metadata. I'm really pleased to be here and talk about our spoke work in data sharing. And also, it's interesting to hear this little side discussion about the ring. When we talk about the data sharing ring, which I'm also involved in the Northeast Data Hub, we keep using the word community, René, so instead. So maybe I'll call it that. So I would like to say thanks to Rebecca and Adam for their work and pulling people together here. And as I looked at the schedule for the next 2 days, it's clear there are some really interesting topics, and I think there'll be some excellent, thoughtful discussion. So, all right, so what am I going to do? I want to talk about the motivation behind our spoke proposal, and the title of our spoke proposal is A Licensing Model and Ecosystem for Data Sharing. So talk about that. And then I'm going to share with sort of three first activities that we've been doing to move forward on our spoke work. One was a workshop we had in the fall at Drexel University. It was a Northeast Hub Drexel workshop. Our work towards standardizing licenses for data sharing, and some initial work in developing a software for data sharing, and then wrap up with conclusions and next steps. Actually, can I go back? Yes. I do want to go back for a second and say what I'm presenting on is not just my work. This is a collaborative work, and so other folks involved, Sam Grabus, who's a doctoral student working with me at Drexel, Karsten Binnig and Tim Kraska in the computer science department at Brown, Sam Madden, who is the lead PI on our effort, and Danny Weitzner, both at MIT. And so we're on the spoke proposal, but the community is a larger collaborative effort, and anybody can engage. And so we're looking for continued work there. So just to set the stage, and I hope to see the discussion that happens later on today, data sharing, okay? We know data sharing is good. You can create a more complete picture of what's happening out there. It's important for addressing grand challenges in health, energy, and the environment, for studying a phenomena. The more people who share data, the better we can get a more complete picture. It's also a better return on investment. We can't get all the data together individually to study a phenomena and make sure it's high quality, but if we have multiple people working on a problem together, we can get more data to study the problem and have it in a better condition. So you have more data to do your analytics and study a problem over time. You also have more experts who are engaged and look at the problem and look at the way it's being studied with the data analytics and the data work, so that they can check the other people studying it and have more insight and look at novel approaches. You have a collective community. Also leads to data reuse in unexpected ways if we have more data sharing. So better insights and so forth. And this is happening in the open data environment. I think probably a lot of people here are familiar with sort of the linked open data and the open data community. Can I just see yes? People are hearing about this, and there's a lot of good work there, and there's more work to do. And the work that's happening in the open data community actually is important for sharing data in communities that are not always open and have restrictions. And so there's frameworks and protocols and standards that are really helpful, and there's more work to do here, and it doesn't answer all our questions. And just to give you I've been involved in some of these large-scale cyber infrastructure initiatives where there is data sharing. Data One is a community with earth science, data sharing, international, a lot of hubs and nodes, and so that's been working out for I guess now 8 years. The DataNet Federation has a data sharing platform where there are different disciplines. So you've got social science, a focus in water, a focus in astronomy, all sharing data to look and study problems. Dryad is another project where they are publishing data as part of the scholarly communications output. So scientists who are publishing in journals that are a member of this repository are told, yes, your article's accepted, make your revisions, but you need to put your data in Dryad and get a digital object identifier that is then linked to your article. And so it's actually part of scholarship. And there's even reviewing that happens in this. So these things are happening and they're useful, but it's not always open. And so here's just one example where there is some security going on, and this is the Collaborative Cancer Cloud, which is a partnership between OHSU, Austin, and Bastón, where they are pulling together genomic data to make it available for computation, but there are obviously some restrictions there, and it's just for these partners. It's not an open access kind of activity. And another is this work where there's machine learning going on behind and looking at FICO scores, sharing research with data. So where they're looking at people's credit ability and forecasting and so forth. So these efforts are taking place, and they involved a lot of work to get to them in terms of legal issues. So there are data sharing barriers, and people don't always want to share, and sometimes people could even fight over data. And this is what we're trying to address in a more standard way. So let me just point out some of the barriers that maybe we're thinking them, but let's try to identify them, because we need to identify them so that we can talk about them, so that we can address them methodologically. So the first is licensing agreements. When I had that picture of the open cloud up, and I showed even Dryad and the data one, those data sharing activities are happening under what's called Creative Commons CC0, and there's CC0 BY and other ways. These licenses that come out of the Creative Commons, where when you're sharing data, you check off and you know that your data is out there being shared, and this includes your data and metadata, and it's open and accessible and reusable. And that, it's not a one-size-fits-all. Those licenses have been around, but they don't meet the demands when you're sharing data, and there's sensitive information, and there's legal barriers and privacy things to address. So one is the licensing agreements are not there in any standardized way. Next, rights and privacy, and these are issues that we're going to be talking about over the next 2 days. So there are major concerns over sensitive information, and I do have to refer back to Dryad because that's one project I've been very intimately involved in, and any data that we have published in that project, we look at that data first and make sure there is no PII, personal identifying information, on any of the research that gets published. If scientists submit that by accident, we just send it back, and they have to remove that. So. Policy. There are complex policies out there governing the use of data in different domains. If you're looking at industry sharing with academia, an industry has their policies, the academic institution has their policies, and so coming together and getting everyone to agree on a data sharing when you have competing policies or different policies takes a lot of time to come to the table and work it out. And then we have to think about data. Data is a living thing. Even if you have your data published or captured and you want to go share it, the industry and the academic partnership, or even a nonprofit or government, there are these fears. People don't want to lose control over their data downstream. Like maybe the sharing thing goes well and all the papers are signed, but then there's this I want to say freak out or concern, like, well, what happens when we're done? Who's going to put it? Where's it going to go? What if somebody wants to use it downstream? What if the data has to be updated? Do we need a whole new agreement? And then what if the data that's shared is redacted? Like there's some problem with it. Then how do we get it out of the research cycle? So security, I think this really touches on other things that I've already said, but there's systematic and technical aspects of data sharing, and when you get to sensitive information, it's like kind of red alert in terms of security, because you've got sensitive information and you've got confidential information. And we've all heard in the news over the last few years all kinds of interesting things with data security breaches. So that's on people's mind. And then sort of the fifth one is incentives. There's this, as I said, I would say robust open science data sharing community, and there's data sharing that's been around for a long time, particularly in places like astronomy and open. So was it the Sloan? I think it's called Open Sky, and other communities. And Dryad started out in evolutionary biology, and evolutionary biologists couldn't do their work if they didn't have a history of data sharing. So there's incentives there, but how can we make the incentives more appealing when there is sensitive and private information? When you've got industry, they want to have forecasts and so forth, but how can you make them understand that sharing will help them? So, all right, so data sharing today, we have the problems with legal barriers and agreements, and we always need to involve lawyers. And so I will use the example of industry and academia, or government and academia, and you've got, you got lots of people coming to the table. It costs a lot of money and it takes a lot of time. And what happens is you get everyone has good intentions, they come to the table, and 6 months later, you still don't have the data agreement. Because everyone is still going through the protocols and process and worried about all those things I had on the other slides. The other thing that happens, maybe 6 months, 8 months later, everything works out, but by the time the data sharing agreement is signed and everyone's happy, the data may not be that good anymore. It's just like the phenomena that wanted to be studied is not as pressing. So, I think there's merit in data sharing. In this other environment, everyone can have a piece of the cake, and that's what we're trying to do we're trying to move, as I say to René sometimes, move the needle forward in addressing these challenges with data sharing when there are these other issues in the closed environment. And so there is a data sharing, I want to say community, I'm going to use that word now, in the Northeast Big Data Hub. And the work that we propose then, a licensing model, an ecosystem for data sharing, emanated from this development, which actually was sparked in the original kickoff hub meeting after the hubs were initially identified. So the three areas where we've made some progress are in developing a framework to generate licenses, and then in the data sharing platform, and then obviously I'm always pushing on the metadata end, but the metadata really relates to number one. Karsten, I have him underlined here because he thinks, in principle, put him on the spot, we can by parsing licenses and doing this work, maybe we can solve 80% of this problem where lawyers come together and try to figure out things. Like, we could develop templates where people could start at a place where the vetting's already been done. I'm kind of more comfortable with saying 60%, but I like to think that we could get to 80%. So what have we been doing? We have a web page for our project. You can link to it from the hub. It's at the Metadata Research Center, and we're tracking there our outputs and presentations and publications to come. First results is we had this workshop. It was a fantastic workshop. It was in last fall at Drexel University. René was very involved, and we had like 50 some people there. We had people from industry, academia, government, and nonprofits coming together. We had great representatives. We had Experian, we had folks from Amazon, we had folks from IMS Health, we had people from DOE, NIH, NSF, and then a lot of academic institutions represented not only in the Northeast hub, but we had people come from each of the other hubs as well. And so for 2 days we got together, and we had presentations about data sharing. We called them war stories, stories from the trenches where there were these activities, data sharing work taking place between industry and academics, where it worked out and what happened and why it worked out and what worked out well, or where it didn't work out. And I do remember one person from IMS Health, Joe Chaya, reporting where the data sharing agreement worked out, but it took so long by the time it worked out, it just was useless. So we seeded our conversations with the sharing of these stories, and then had lots of breakout groups and discussed what worked, what doesn't, what are barriers, and brainstorm solutions. And it really confirmed to us that the work on, this was the larger community, but the work on the proposal for the Spoke Hub to move forward on data sharing agreements and try to standardize this work that's done over and over again every time people want to share data that's sensitive and has privacy concerns, that this idea of thinking about licenses beyond Creative Commons was a really good thing to do. And so that helped confirm that. And then we identified certain action items, which we're going to be working on. Probably in the next 2 weeks, there'll be a data sharing community webpage that's launched. We have the framework set up, so you can stay tuned on that. But here's just a picture of folks who made it to the bitter end of the workshop. And so coming out of that, and now a little more specific to what we're doing on the Spoke project that we confirmed from the workshop, is Sam Grabus and another graduate student of mine, Hongwei Liu, have been parsing through data sharing agreements. And I make this plea to you all here that we are very interested if anybody wants to share any data sharing agreements with us. We are agnostic, we'll take them all. And we're parsing through them, and we're looking at common languages. And I sort of identify these areas as facets right now. We've got these general areas that you think about when you are developing a data sharing agreement. So, general privacy, access, responsibility, and the kinds of information that would be under that. And let me just show you where we're going. The other thing we've done is we're parsing through them in natural language, the NLTK, where a student of mine is sort of looking at the terms and the frequency of terms, so we can really learn what's being used most frequently. So you can think about, if we get through these licenses, and right now we have a small data set of about 15 licenses. I mean, we want 100. We really want to look at this across the board, and we might then also, we're talking amongst ourselves till we pick some selected domains. But you could think about general domains, a template that might satisfy all cases, and we get the 30% or 40%, and maybe there's a specific domain like smart, we're at a smart grid conference, or some area in health where we could have address the next 30%. So you could think about somebody wanting to do data sharing, industry, academics, whatever, coming to a system, and they check what they want. And so now we're moving to the prototyping of the framework. And here's where we have this idea of, I decided to skip that slide because it comes up later, is that when they select these areas, they can get the text clause that we're pulling out of the licenses. So for instance, access control rights management, the information comes up on controlled access, who and where, tracking of access and rights, and it's filled in, or there's a drop-down menu of selected text. Here's another example, expiration and then duration of use. So another agreement clause that comes out in the data sharing license. Logging and auditing. Okay, the agreement clause would deal with tracking, access, and copying. And provenance and fingerprinting, that would impact things like usage rights and publication and copying. And so this one other than de-identification, or what is called noising and aggregation. And again, the clauses here that would be relevant would be usage rights, publication, and copying. And so this is where we are in terms of brainstorming, so forth. So some first results then in Tim and particularly Karsten Binning at Brown, and then folks working with Sam at MIT are working very much on, it's called DB Share. It's a system, and they are working on the de-identification and also aspects of anonymization. But de-identification is really key, and they're looking at HIPAA and FERPA and working to do an interactive way of implementing de-identification and thinking about the sensitive data that needs to be removed from data sets in terms of data sharing so that it can automatically de-identify. So you can think about this, where the green things with a check need to be removed so the de-identification is successful and the other kinds of data is okay to get de-identification. So here's then that slide again that I whipped through, but here's the, share DB, I called it DB share system, but you've got your data user, it could actually be academic to industry or industry to academics, but the data user, the data owner, or the data creator. So we have people, but you could think of even an institution or corporation or so forth. And so then you've got the data, and you've got training. The user is trained to work with the protocols. You've got up there suitability for the identification, the de-identification, the fingerprinting of the data. You have an access, and you have an access log. And this is the model of where we are going. So, all right. So I hope that this has seeded will seed some of our discussion in terms of us going forward. I'll make some concluding remarks and then share a little bit about next steps. So we have work underway. It's been a lot of heavy lifting to get people together and frame the conversation and move forward. We, in the larger community, as I said, we had this great workshop, and we have an engaged community. And I've presented on this work a few times, even these first initial steps. And everywhere I've gone, I have somebody come up to me like after and say, we would be a good community for a test. Can you include us? So we have multiple communities that want to be a case study. So I think in the data sharing community, we're going to look at identifying actual case studies of, sort of in health, or I said I was just at a smart grid workshop, and they're very interested, and so forth. So there's infrastructure to build on, and I think it's important to just not throw out all this great progress that continues to happen in the open science community and what we can learn from there. I think metadata is key to all of this, and so I've got their metadata-driven solutions, but the licenses we're looking at show a great diversity, and we really want to be collecting more and be able to identify that it's just like big data, right? The more licenses we have, the more sure we can be at what we're implementing in terms of text and pulling out, so better results. So next steps, in our spoke proposal, we said we would have a workshop, so we will be having a workshop in the fall, in the fall of 2007. I have here the links, though, to our previous workshop that took place at Drexel, as well as our final report from that workshop, and there's a set of action items, and we actually have a DOI now, so it's been published. We, as I said, eager to collect more licenses. In terms of the metadata support that we're looking at, one of sort of my raising the flag or MOs is what we don't want to do is reinvent the wheel with the metadata that would support all of this. There's a lot of good work, not only in open science, but in metadata with provenance tracking and rights metadata and security metadata and authenticity metadata and so forth. So we're looking at that, creating application profile where you pull the metadata properties together. So, but this is not a metadata talk. You can see I could get going on that topic, but anyhow, so we're doing that. And extending our share DB support. And then the last thing is we've made some nice links with the Research Data Alliance, which is another NSF, US NSF activity, but it links on a global effort. The Research Data Alliance is a global initiative about research data and sharing. And so Sam Grabus, our doctoral student, is going to be mining, for part of her work there, mining IRB, institutional review board, things that happen in academics when you share data, and looking at terms there. So that's it, and thanks for letting me share. And do we have a few minutes for questions? All right, excellent. Yes.
Two quick things. The first one is, are the talks online of the workshop?
Yes. Everything is online. If you can get to the hub, the Northeast Data Hub workshop, it will link you to the project page, or if you just go to the Metadata Research Center and look under news, there's a workshop page.
And you put up cci.drexel.edu/MRC. And there are the actual talks there.
Yeah, the slides for each talk are put together, and the abstract and the report that's been published.
Okay.
And if you have any problems, just contact me.
Okay, great. Now, the real question.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm somebody who's done a lot of big empirical studies with real industrial data as a researcher at AT&T Research, when it still existed. So first of all, is your vision that data is a living thing, and when you share data, is your vision that the sharer is always in the loop for the rest of the life of the data? And the second thing is, how are you dealing with the fact that people sometimes misunderstand data and therefore, not maliciously, but inadvertently misuse data because they simply don't understand what's in the data? They think they understand.
So let me try to address the first one, and also I talked to René beforehand, and he has all rights to jump in, because even though René's not on the spoke proposal, he's been very involved in our work and in the community. So the first one is, how do you deal with data as a living thing and data downstream? That's something we need to address in the data sharing agreements and the templates that are minted. And so we talk about data downstream. After the work has done, what happens with the data? Is the lead researcher institution always in control? So one thing could be, when in this agreement, there could be an option, research is done, I hate to say this, destroy data or something, or make data unusable until a new agreement is minted. And what are the technical activities that need to be done? The other is that part of the agreement is that this data goes to some kind of safe, trusted repository, but it doesn't have to be an open access repository. It could be a safe, trusted environment that maybe exists between that industry and that partner for longevity, and has a set of legal agreements already tied up. So because data is a living thing and people are living things, but people are not around forever. We have to look at this digital data like it can be around forever, right? So that is a conversation that is happening. It's up there in terms of our high-level facets or categories. And so in working on these licenses, we know we need to address that. Do we have an exact answer? No, but we don't have an exact answer on any of these things, but we know that that's really important. So do you want to add something to that? Then I'll go to the next question.
Sure. So definitely the notion of data as a living thing, which sometimes bites, is important. The type of structure that's being created here is to allow both open and sensitive data to be shared. And the sensitive data, as Jane said, individuals may not be around, organizations may be around longer, but even they may not be around. But the notion there is that we're allowing organizations to share in whatever mechanism they're comfortable with sharing. And what we're trying to do is provide tools on the other side where they can actually see what's happening with the data. So one of the patterns of feedback that we got from industry, whether it was GE or IMS or Experian, is that they're actually very willing to share the data. The problem is that when they're sharing sensitive data, there are certain requirements and protocols that they've set up within their organization and with other companies that they share with. And when it goes to researchers, it's very difficult for them to ensure that those protocols are actually followed. So part of what this platform will attempt to do is to actually allow them to see that these protocols are being followed, because you have all of the restrictions potentially when somebody logs in based on the data sharing agreement. So that's kind of the idea behind it.
So, but the more pressing thing is the technical question of have you thought about the issue of you put data out there and people think they understand what it means, but they really don't, and then the conclusions that are drawn from it,
So let me try to address that. But I first of all, also thank you for your questions. They're great questions. That is a problem that exists, whether it's open data, closed data, you know, my own data, you know, I mean, like, you know, this is a problem. One of the things I will say, and it might sound sort of like, you know, oh, everyone hug each other, but that the more data sharing that happens and the more eyes are on it, the more likely we are to catch the bad use of data. So if you have, or, you know, the misuse and not understanding. So if you have one person working with a data set with another person and there's not this agreement that, you know, maybe others are involved, you don't have as many eyes on it. So you're less likely to catch that. And so I think that data sharing in a sense can be helpful. But in terms of training people, and I see somebody might have a comment back there, training people to make sure they interpret it right. I mean, I don't have any other answer right now other than I think it's something to bring up in the agreement that the you know, about understandability. And if you looked at the model, the ShareDB, we have up there training as part of it and understanding, you know, the licenses and so forth.
So before you move on, I think that's something to add about this that we're doing at the Hub, which may or may not address the question.
Answer though.
But so I just came from our data literacy workshop, which we ran with the New York Hall of Science. So I think there are multiple aspects to this challenge. One is the aspect of, and in fact this is part of the conversation we had at the data sharing workshop with companies, is in some cases you require training of the folks who are going to use the data so that they understand how to actually comply with whatever the protocols are that the data sharer wants them to comply with. But there's a more general challenge of practitioners understanding how to use data and data science outputs for their work. And that's something that we're trying to address with both the data literacy aspect of this. We have an ethics community as well. And in addition to that, we're trying to launch a practitioner training series, which is going to be essentially short courses on thinking about how to use data effectively, and also thinking about how to make sure that you're thinking about privacy, security, algorithmic and data bias, and these types of things. So there are a lot of angles to it that we're trying to address now. I don't know if that answers the question fully.
Let me give you a very concrete example. Okay? This is a real concrete example.
Are we okay on time? Yeah. Okay.
So,
I mean, we should get to some of the other people too.
All right, okay.
But yeah.
Okay. He had.
budget.
On the same axis that she was talking about, where you have good data and a bad use of it, is it possible to have bad data and a hope for a good use of it that doesn't work out because of some, whatever the aspect may be of the data? Is there liability of the data provider for any uses? Is that question being considered?
I think it should be considered. I don't think we've had quite that discussion yet, but I want to refer back to what René was saying, which is in I see the vision with the data literacy. This could really fit in here, and it could come under that. You know, I mean, the data should be vetted, and we should have good data and data sharing. But it happens that there is bad data, and there's bad data sharing.
These two scenarios: good faith, bad faith. Bad faith, somebody salts the data badly because they want to create a bad outcome. Good faith is they think it's good. Somebody sets up a cancer treatment breakthrough result, it doesn't work. Somebody dies, and we have an energetic water.
So we're getting into data quality, and you know, which is really a real issue, and so that has, but I don't think I think this is great, and I think this discussion is really important, and so maybe we need to continue in our spoke work and even in the community. Actually, when I think about the workshop report, the outputs, data quality was a big topic. But I don't have any answers on the licensings yet. So there are 2 more comments, and I didn't want to cut you off from your original. But this is great. This is excellent, and this is what we had hoped to see the discussion. So I really appreciate all of this. And yeah, so let's see, Adam, and then Andrew, and then one more quickly as well. Okay, go ahead. We'll try. I love it. Thank you. Go ahead.
So I guess I had a question about the de-identification. Have you? I'm not too familiar with ShareDB, but there are lots of situations where sort of just removing PII, obviously identifying attributes is so woefully insufficient.
Yeah.
Has there been any consideration of that as part of the project, or is it really just looking at compliance with compliance?
So I'm really probably not the best person to answer that question, because it's really Sam at MIT and Karsten and Tim at Brown who are the computer scientists, but they've been working at this for a while, and they have some really good tested activities with HIPAA, and so I would be happy to put you in touch with them or get more information, but yes, they're aware of the shortcomings, and they've been testing, and DBShare is up, or ShareDB, it's up on GitHub, so you can read more about it and what they've been doing there. So.
I had other questions, but I'll let
Okay. Well, I'll be around too, and I want to make sure the other. So tell me when we can.
Go ahead with this.
Okay, and then because we want this great next presentation. Okay, so go ahead.
So I'm Andrew Williams. I'm from Maine Medical Center Research Institute, and I both use big data as a researcher and build resources for research. And I applaud this work. It's going to be very valuable. I'm here to try and develop a spoke proposal, and I look forward to figuring out how we can build in what you're doing to both feed it and benefit from it. But I had a comment about what I think is an important dimension that wasn't mentioned. It's probably been a part of the discussions you've had already, but I'll bring it up here again. It's, I think, interpersonal trust in addition to institutional trust, is a main part of this. So my experience in a large health research network where data sharing was done successfully led me to believe that knowing who was going to be handling your data, knowing what their real intentions were, knowing that they could interpret it well, would be able to identify data quality issues, would be able to draw proper inferences from it, was really the key. And I think something that can't really be adequately addressed no matter what kind of, I think you can help it with training, you can help it with having the right kinds of institutional agreements. Those are all incredibly important. But I think a lot of what remains after those things are still done that's also very important is the community you talked about building here, of people who just have had the experiences with one another that lead them to know I can trust that you're not going to use this to your company's advantage against mine, or your individual interest against mine, and that you're going to report things to me that I would want reported, and so on.
So, I see like the triangle between you three, the trust and the quality. And at this point, I can say that trust and quality were definite themes that came up again and again and again over our workshop in September. Do we have anything yet in the early work with the minting of licenses that address trust? We haven't pulled out anything yet, but I think we can't, these are really key issues.
I guess one of the things that one might do is just foster small interactions that build trust. It's a social capital question, and there are activities that can be used to kind of provide graduated experiments that yield social capital in the community that might be fostered systematically.
Yeah, so a person could have a sort of digital signature that satisfies them as a trusted person, right? So I think about sort of the semantic web stack or something, but there's trust is really, really important in that level. And I know you want to say something still.
I'm just going to say that,
Yeah.
well, related to this, and the ability to go back and to say to the person, when you have this here, does it mean what I think it means?
Yeah.
Is critical.
Yeah.
To make sure they understand it. So, this is great. So I appreciate it, and I think we can feed this into our continued work, and thank you. And make sure that it's highlighted more, because it hasn't been. So I guess this should be our last comment, so that you can do your great
Right. I have what I hope is a softball question. Given the title of your presentation you're doing in the fall, from what government agencies for people in the trenches are you getting input? Just in my case, I work very closely with people doing licensing agreements. However, offline, I'd be delighted to show you the good, the bad, and the hideous of licensing agreements in an environment of FOIA.
Yeah. So that would be awesome. We would look at them. So right now, our licenses, getting people to share licenses, and actually, we almost feel like we need. I got an email yesterday from my doc student saying, I think we need a data sharing agreement about sharing licenses. All right. She said, and I knew that was coming, because we have a thing like, if you share your license, it will be confidential. We won't share it with anybody. You can black out, the name of the parties involved. It's not so easy to even get those, but we have some ideas, René, about addressing agencies broad scale and stuff. So we have not approached government agencies yet. Right now, it's been industry and academics. So, but we work, as I said, right now, to even move this discussion forward and address this topic based on your guys' questions and what's going on. We've got to move forward on something, and so at least collecting licenses from people we can get them, I think, is a first step. So I now have your card, and I will be following up with you, and we would love to have some data sharing licenses from you. And so I think I should stop so we can allow for the next presentation, but I really thank folks for honing in on those points. I feel like next time I have a slide, I better have those bullets up there about quality and trust. And I haven't actually looked back at our report. I was so busy on getting the DOI assigned to it in the last few weeks, but I need to go back and look at our report, and I know in the action items and themes, those two topics are addressed, so I need to bring them to the table more prominently in our group work. So thank you, everyone. Thanks.